Morena and kia ora, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've got an increasing number of people joining. I can see the numbers tick up 68, so thanks for those online. We'll just wait a few more seconds. And while we do that, I'll just quickly start off and introduce myself. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Joy. I'll be moderating today's webinar on cybersecurity for New Zealand businesses. Just a little bit about me. I am a senior associate in our commercial and technology team here in Auckland and at Duncan Cotterill. I work with a pretty wide range of clients, from startups to medium-sized businesses and large multinationals as well, on a broad range of commercial issues such as general commercial contracting, as well as privacy, cyber, very relevant today, as well as intellectual property. But I also work on corporate structuring work as well, so setting up a business, helping startups with venture arrangements and funding arrangements, as well as shareholding arrangements as well. So that's a little bit about me. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll now kick off. So our session today comes at a time when cybersecurity is ever more complex and more critical than ever before. And whether you're a small business owner or whether you lead a large organisation, cyber threats are more critical than ever to pay attention to. And the stakes are high. The rise of AI is reshaping the threat landscape and creating new opportunities, but also introducing new risks as well, some of which we'll touch on today. At the same time, regulatory expectations are increasing and evolving, as Peter will take us through today as well. And so today we'll talk you through how you go about being prepared in advance, but also dealing with cyber attacks if and when they happen. So I'm joined by two fantastic speakers, Peter Fernando, partner at Duncan Cotterill, and Ray Chow, senior manager at Westpac. And I'll just hand over to them now to do a self-introduction. So Peter, do you want to kick off?
Yep, thank you, Joy, and thank you everyone for joining us. So I'm Peter Fernando, a partner in Duncan Cotterill's commercial and technology team. Now I'm based in Christchurch, but work nationally and also internationally as well. So don't let the virtual webinar be the only time you connect nationally. This is something we do regularly. In my role, I assist with both the front end and the back end arrangements, particularly to do with technology and anything in the cyber space. So at the front end, we assist clients with implementing IT systems, working out how to collect data in a legally compliant way, reviewing contractual arrangements, both between customers and suppliers. So that's the front end. Now the back end is around when things go wrong. So that is when cyber issues arise. Now this could be a situation where there's been a cyber attack by a threat actor. It could be some sort of technology failure, something's gone wrong. But either way, our role there is to be part of the incident response team. We work out, well, what's happened? How can we minimize the impact? And then if it's something that's notifiable to other people, how do we go about notifying to ensure compliance with those aspects? And of course, given that it's 2025 now, artificial intelligence and Gen AI is an increasing part of both the front end arrangement, but also the back end. But we'll talk about that a bit later.
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter. Over to you, Ray.
Good morning, everyone. So it's great to join this webinar. My name is Ray Chow. I've been with, I've been in the cybersecurity industry for over 20 years, and I've worked in different functions from security incident response, law enforcement, security operations, and also being CISO'd across government sectors and also private sectors. Currently that I'm with I head up the cybersecurity advisory function in the Westpac security team, where my team of consultants are giving out product security advices and guidance across our product and services. Outside of my role at Westpac, I'm also a board member for a cybersecurity industry working group, where the like-minded security professionals across the country wanting to protect the New Zealand internet space. And with my length of career in cybersecurity industry, it gave me the opportunity to see how cybersecurity and also the threat changes as technology evolve, and we'll touch on some of those today. Over to you, Joy.
Great, thanks. That's impressive background, Ray. So before we kick off, just some, I guess, housekeeping. Today's webinar is meant to run for 45 minutes. We've received such a large number of great questions ahead of the webinar, thanks to all those who have submitted them, that we've decided to extend our session today to 11. For those who need to drop off at 10:45, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll keep going after that. We'll make sure we cover the most important parts before then. All right, so let's start with you, Ray, and a bit of context setting. What are the most common types of cyber threats you're seeing targeting small to medium-sized businesses, and how have these threats evolved with the rise of AI?
So there are many, but I'll cover the top three that are targeting SME. So the first one is phishing. So essentially that is triggering employee to give away sensitive information, such as password, financial detail, typically through email or websites, luring you to websites to give those information away. Business email compromise, fraudulent email that actually appears coming from a trusted source, aiming to trick recipient into transferring money or giving away sensitive information or data. The last one, or the third one, it has shifted to rank ransomware. Typically, that is the type of attack that aim to encrypt the victim organization's files and data and demand a ransom to restore access. Small medium enterprises are often targeted because they don't have sufficient robust security measures to prevent the ransomware attack. What it means with the arrival of AI. Cyber criminals, AI, it's both accessed by the defenders of cyber criminals and also accessed by the cyber criminals themselves. And the cyber criminals uses AI to increase the level of sophistication of attack when they target SME. What it will give them to execute, it's automating phishing attack. What that means is then AI can generate it more convincing phishing email because they're very personalized and harder to detect, where we typically look for the odd email addresses, the grammar, the pictures is harder to detect now with the introduction of AI. Deepfakes, using AI to generate fake videos or audio to impersonate exact employee, leading to more fraud or misinformation, or even giving away information because you feel that it's a trusted source. There are ways to detect that. And then the other one is around social engineering. Social engineering has been around for a long time, so it's essentially a fancy term for con man. But the enhancement through AI, it means that cyber criminals will use AI to gather and analyze information about the victim organizations, and it will make it so much easier to target the smear organizations and creating more convincing social engineering attacks. AI is leading great exposure to smear and to become fallen victims to data breaches, fraud, and scams. And that's why cybersecurity is becoming increasingly more important to every organizations, no matter which industry segments, no matter what size industry segments, or no matter what organization size you are.
Yeah, that's some great points, Ray. And one of our audience questions was, how do you tell if something is coming from a human or non-human? And I think you mentioned, Ray, that it's even hard for experts like yourself to distinguish that, right? Let alone business owners. And so this raises the need to be prepared and take steps now. Just before I pass on to Peter, can I just mention that you can ask questions in the Q&A function at any time. So please drop in your questions and we'll try and cover them both during the session and also afterwards. So Peter, this raises the pertinent question of the legal landscape and the regulatory environment for cybersecurity and data protection. So can you walk us through what key laws or regulations are relevant here?
Yep, of course, Joy. So I'd say when we're thinking about cybersecurity risks, one of the main features of our regulatory environment is the Privacy Act 2020. So most of you will hopefully be familiar with this, but what it does, it sets out the key obligations for any business who's collecting, using, storing or disclosing personal information. So from a legal standpoint, that's one of the main things we look at. I'll touch on that in a bit longer in a moment. I guess other things to think about are we've got general laws around, we've got the Crimes Act. I guess there are some particular computer crimes that can arise. And then we've also got, the Contract and Commercial Law Act, which provides remedies if someone's breached a contract with you. Now, one aspect that people don't really think about too often is a cyber event could actually cause you to breach a contract if you, for example, agreed to keep some information confidential and then it's been stolen from you. You could, in fact, not only have that problem, but someone else might say, hang on, you didn't do what you're supposed to do with protecting it. Now that's a little bit more abstract, but the concrete example that we really focus on in this space is the Privacy Act 2020. And for an SME, you probably deal with more personal information than you think. So, for example, any information you're holding about your employees and their bank accounts and their identity information, well, that's all personal information. And any information you've got about your customers and their contact information and anything else about them is also personal information. So the regulatory requirement for the Privacy Act, it says that when you've got personal information like that, you as an SME have to take reasonable steps to protect that information against loss and unauthorised use, disclosure or modification. So it's thinking about that in practice. Well, what does that mean? Well, we usually recommend for SMEs to take a deep think about, well, what information do you have? A bit of an audit or a triage to say, well, what are we holding? And then what risks could occur if a bad actor got hold of this information? And there might be some information that's really, routine, can't really cause harm. You might say, well, that's low risk. But there might be other information that's much more sensitive. And you say, well, we need to protect that even more. To give a really good example, we were recently assisting a small business who had suffered a cyber attack. It was a ransomware type, like Ray had mentioned. But one of the things that the attackers did was stole a bunch of information of driver's licenses and passports that the business was required to hold for their employees. Now, they had a lawful reason to keep that information, so there was nothing wrong with that. Now, the problem here was that they stored that on a shared drive that was used by management. Really convenient for the management team, but also quite convenient for the attackers because they got hold of the information and could try and use it for ransom purposes. So since then, what they've done is they've implemented a new process where they've realised that information is really sensitive, so they've stored that in a different place away from the main drives, where only they know how to get to, and actually it's disconnected from the internet. It's a safe, unconnected place. That's because they've gone through that experience and realised how that regulatory framework actually applies to them in their context.
Really useful example, thanks Peter, and shows that you need to treat different types of information differently, and the Privacy Commissioner has that expectation as well. And so it is useful to always look at the type of information and data that you hold and segregate particularly sensitive or confidential information. Thanks, Peter. So Ray, what then are the preventative steps and proactive steps that SMEs can take now to protect themselves from scams and fraud and cyber attacks? And actually, one of the audience asked, can SMEs actually leverage AI to do this?
Cool. So to combat evolving threats, there are preventative steps that SMEs can protect themselves and against scams and fraud. The first one would be strengthening your authentication processes. Implement strong authentication process or methods, including complex password. So differentiate the importance of the account. So if you have system accounts that use for your key critical systems, have more complex password. And then the other one is the enabling multi-factor authentications to make it harder for a cyber criminal to gain access to your systems. I know that I'm aware that with security web capabilities are getting more expensive. There are free to low cost alternatives to provide the equivalent of conditional access. Means that is, how do you enable the access? How do you authorize the access or multi-factor authenticating enforcement? So something which is then for the SME to look into as alternative. Is from the premium tierings around some of the options are enabling security defaults. Most of the capabilities now offers security by default. Turn them on, so it's free. So enable them. The other one is the considering your risk factors. If it costs to enable MFA, which is multi-factor authentications, use a risk-based approach to determine who needs to enable that. So, for example, your execs, any account staff, anyone who hold access to critical information, any of your IT staff who have access to your critical systems, they will need to have that additional challenge. And the other aspect is around third-party tools. So there are third-party tools available that you can tap into, which makes it a more cost-effective options. The other one is the other preventive steps are backup and recovery plan, making sure that your data are regularly backup and can be restored, test the data, making sure that in case of a ransomware attack, you can restore those data. Backing up alone is not going to be enough because you need to make sure that in case of any emergencies, they work. And also keeping a system up to date, patch them and updating. So that would then protect against your organizations from any known vulnerabilities where cyber criminals often, they're lazy. They target for lower hanging fruit, and that's what they will aim for first. From a financials around scams and fraud, monitoring your transactions, setting up alerts. So setting up alerts when there's unusual activities, including or such as large transactions or payment made outside normal business hours, or even just large amount that you want to make sure that you put steps in place to introduce frictions. So you can, yes, there will be more time that may be delayed, but it gives you the safety measures. So you're not going to be figuring out or stressing about how do I claw the money back? Because then that's when the money, especially where cyber criminals are exercising cross borders. So once the money is outside the country, it's a lot harder to chase them back. And that's what cyber criminals are leveraging the cross borders, making it harder to hide identity, making it harder to track, make it easier for them to commit crime. The other one is around looking at your internal controls. Do you have separation of duties, making sure that no one person hold any sole control when over a certain threshold. So just put those buffer in place to slow them down to make sure minimize errors, minimize mistakes, and also making it harder for any cyber criminal to take advantage of any key person risk. Review your contracts, review your invoices. Invoice scam is real. So we're seeing quite a lot of invoice scams experiencing by small and medium enterprises. Review your contracts, review your invoices that they are legitimate and match the services and product that you are actually getting. So follow from the contract all the way through to the services, you are getting what you pay for. Educate and train your people. Train them. So understanding and recognizing how to detect phishing, other scams, and understanding your organization, what type of scams is more exposed to. No one size equal. So understanding that how you would detect those, and that will help to create a vigilant workforce. And often people are the first line of defense. When they do the job, they will know what's odd and give them the opportunity to call it out. Coming back to the other questions around AI. AI is useful, but the key is get your basics right. AI is there to enhance your operations. If you don't have the basics right, AI is going to introduce chaos. There are capabilities in AI to help you with detections, telling you any vulnerabilities within an organization proactively. So there are capabilities out there. Then also adaptive security measures. What that means is, especially from a phishing and business email compromise, there are capability to detect that, hey, we have past incident. Can we use that to train our people so that they are becoming more vigilant to detect those kind of phishing attacks or business email compromise? So there are capabilities. AI will help, but again, I want to emphasize that the basics are important. The basics are the building block, whether that you invest or enhance your cybersecurity capability with or without AI. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet in AI. There are different sides of AI. There are the paid versions and the free versions where it comes with risk. The free versions means that it's not just only to security. AI in general, they are free and paid. When it's free, which means that your data, your organization's data, your sensitive data are being used to train to make the AI tool better. What that means then for cyber criminals, they can ask AI to give them, hey, what have you got around personal information? What have you got around sensitive information? There are ways to interrogate the AI to give you the right answer. And then also privacies and copyright infringement, so all those issues become real. And then the pay versions give you better control. What that means, then you're leveraging AI, but you're using it only for your organizations. Obviously, cost is a factor as well. So there are measures in place that so the best measures if you use AI, the input on what you put in is the best way to protect your organizations. And by adapting those steps and preventative steps, that will help your organizations to prevent to better protect against cyber attack.
Such a helpful list. Thank you, Ray. And for those who didn't manage to get every one of those points, what we will do afterwards is circulate some key points afterwards, which will hopefully you can refer to in the future as well. Someone just asked, is the session being recorded and will it be shared? There's probably an option to do that. It is being recorded. So if people want the webinar, I'm sure that we can send that out afterwards as well. Great. So then, Peter, on planning proactively and steps to take now. So should businesses, and in particular SMEs, be preparing an incident response plan? And what is it, and what does it include?
Yeah, so the short answer there is yes. All businesses, including SMEs, should have an incident response plan. So that's a good recommendation. The key things for a plan like that are really around the who and the what and the when. So for the who, that's about identifying, well, who's part of your incident response team. So this will usually include key people from your business, so your owners and any other key managers, as well as external experts who can assist. So that could be, IT forensic people. It could be, a legal advisor. It could be someone else who's relevant to your business. But either way, it's good to know who is going to be coming together and managing a response to any sort of incident like this. And the reason why it's important to know that is this will be a really stressful time for your business. It could be the worst day in business when you suffer a cyber attack. So actually knowing, well, what is the plan, who's going to be part of the team is really important to know that in advance. So the team is great to have, but then that takes you to the what. For the what, this is around working out what are the steps that you would take as a business if you suffered a cyber attack. So obviously you cannot plan for every single eventuality. You don't know what type of attack it will be. You don't know when it will happen, but it is really important to have a general idea of the types of activities that you'd be wanting to do. What matters to your business, what do you need to check, what do you need to do, all of that. So those are those general steps. And then the next part is the when. And the when is all about the prioritization. So as I said before, this will be a critical issue for your business, and it will have lots of impacts on the team, and people will be fighting fires, trying to get things sorted, trying to reboot systems, trying to deal with queries from customers or suppliers. So many fires burning all at once. And so the when is to say, well, what are the real priority actions? What are the mission critical things that we need to get up and running again or get access to? And then what are the next steps after you've solved the priority ones? What are the priority twos? And then what are the priority threes? And having that process around, well, we need to do this and we need to do this and we need to do this, but we'll do it methodically and we'll not panic, can be really reassuring for the business as a whole, as well as the people who are usually already working big days, having to work even bigger days to solve this problem. So that's what the plan usually covers. And there are levels of detail you can go to around whether it's a privacy breach or a cyber attack or a invoice fraud or a ransomware attack. So different levels of detail you can put in, but that who, what, and when is what every plan should have.
It's a useful structure, the 3 W's. Did I get that right? Who, what, and when?
Correct.
Great. Okay. And Ray, what are some of the best practices or top tips for SMEs then to detect and respond to cyber threats in real time?
Cool. So coming back to what I said before, once you get your basics right, and then following from Peter's point around incident response plan, because the incident response plan is going to contain the scenarios that's going to disrupt your business. So that will help you to know what you're going to detect and threat evolve. So make sure that you update your incident response plan regularly, because that outlines the different events of cyber attack and what do you do. And that will also outline the roles and responsibilities, communication protocol, how to communicate, who to communicate, what help do you need, and how do you recover. And that would help to make it easier when you're enhancing your detect and response capabilities. And some of the capabilities that you can do to detect and response to real-time threat is monitoring and alerting on your logs. So log sources, essentially that's what is your system telling you happening in your organization. Those are the tools, the first key tools of your security team or anyone or your IT team who want to know what's going on in your environment, because that will tell you the unusual activities, which will help to identify any potential threats early and promptly as well. Understand that it's going to be hard to maintain dedicated functions just to detect and respond to cyber threats. Consider partnering up with a consulting firm or cybersecurity firms or experts that can help to leverage and providing those capability and leverage that workload away from your IT team or security team to triage any alerts and detect any threats earlier. Because if the partners firm or the cybersecurity firms are providing detect and response capabilities, they're doing it for every single customers of theirs, and they're seeing it all the time. They would then be detecting quicker than you do if you're not doing it day in, day out. And some of the best practices or opportunity, what if you have those in place, if you have those tools in place, mentioned before, AI. So, but get your basics right. The AI, a lot of the tools now come with AI capabilities. It helps to learn about your organizations, what's normal, and that will help to alert and train the system to say, group false positive, are they normal or are they abnormal? And the tooling itself, over time, it's just going to increase the accuracies and also train your people as well. Because then, as I mentioned before, your people are your first line of defense. Then how do they report? Do you have the right culture to encourage them to report those? So to effectively battle against any cyber threats or cyber attack, your technology capabilities and your people go hand in hand. Outside of that, the key thing is detect and responding is good, but ideally you don't want to make it happen. And that's where, in addition to basics, make it harder for the bad guys, make it harder for them to go in. What I mentioned before, strong authentication processes, complex password, MFA, make it harder for them so they will go for someone else. Unfortunately, that is, if they do target you, they will get it, because, and that's the nature of cyber criminal. But most criminals, like I said before, they go for low hanging fruit, so they will go for something easy. So in addition to multi-factor authentication, patch your systems, update them, keep them up to date. The other additional measures that you can consider, it's segment your environment. If you have, so imagine that if you have your whole room full of important things, which means that you're making it easier for the cyber criminals or the bad guys to get access to, compartmentalize them. So only keep the access to people who need to access them. So that would then help to determine who have access. So for example, if I have information that only I should have access, but if someone else have access to, immediately alert to you that, hey, that's not right. That will stand out a lot quicker than all the technologies, detection capabilities that you put in place, because you have designed your business process or structure to stand out what's abnormal to start with. So a lot of those practices are there to help. It's not only on technologies, but how you structure your operation, how you structure your business. It's going to speed up the detection of any anomalies and help to mitigate any chances of becoming a victim.
I think that would also help you to identify where there is a certain vulnerability, for example, in your system, and where to target. But it's actually also a recommendation from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner when conducting what's called a privacy impact assessment, say before you launch a new system or implement a new system or tech product, is to conduct that privacy impact assessment. And part of that is to identify, as we said earlier, the different types of information you hold, label the ones that are particularly sensitive, particularly confidential, accord different access levels to those, segregate those from your other types of information. That will hopefully make life a little bit easier for you down the track. Okay, so let's then talk about when that worst day happens. Hopefully it doesn't, but it's happened to very well-known organisations. We would have seen in the media what happened to the Optus cyber attack in Australia. Now there's a huge class action against Optus. Medibank in Australia as well. Latitude in New Zealand. So large organisations are exposed. Small organisations are just doing their best to try and stop this from happening to themselves. So a cyber attack or data breach has happened. Peter, what are the steps a business should take when this happens?
Yeah, so I'd say the common playbook to take, when this happens, is obviously follow your incident response plan. That should be your first go-to. But then often, whether this involves a privacy breach or another sort of breach, there are some really common steps that we usually recommend. So, and those 4 steps are called contain, assess, notify, and prevent. And using these steps means you're reducing the chances of any harm or further harm occurring. So that's the contain, assess, notify, prevent, and I'll talk about each of those in turn. So contain is all around trying to wrap a blanket around the particular problem. So if it's a particular system that's been breached, then disabling access to that system, switching it off or unplugging connections to it can help contain the problem to one place and not let the attackers spread what they call lateral movement throughout your network. There could also be things like changing access credentials and login information so that if something's been compromised, they can't keep using the same credentials to keep attacking you. If it's a situation where some information's been lost, either it's been stolen or it's been misplaced, then trying to either get it back or recreate it from a backup, if you've got a good backup, can actually help you contain the problem. You could say, well, yes, it's been lost, but we've still got a copy. And the reason I mention that is that one of the stronger protections you can have if someone, for example, has locked your systems and they're causing a ransomware attack against you, if one of their threats is, well, we've got your data and you're not going to get it unless you pay us some money, you've got such a stronger protection for yourself. If you can say, we've got a good backup that hasn't been affected, we don't have to pay to get our own data back. That means you still have problems. They've still got your data. They can still do bad things with it, but they can't actually prevent you from getting back to running your business. So it's still a problem. It's just a much smaller problem than it could have been. The other aspect of containment is putting in place any immediate fixes to security. So Ray's mentioned patches. Often these things happen when there have been systems that haven't been updated with the latest updates and patches. So if you realise, hang on, we had a vulnerability, that's how they got in, put in place particular fixes there. Usually attackers, cyber criminals, have a certain playbook that they use about how they go about their attacks. Once we know what attack group it is, we can usually figure out what their tactics are, and then the IT experts can say, well, here's their tactics, here's the weaknesses you need to plug to prevent them doing anything worse. So that's containment. The next step is assess. So this is where you work out, well, what are the risks and how big are those risks? If it's, for example, personal information, it's assessing, well, could this information be used to cause harm to someone? Or is it very, I won't say boring, but very, very just run-of-the-mill information that, yes, they've got it, but it's probably unlikely to harm anyone. That assessment's really important. And following on from that assessment, it's a case of notification. So for privacy incidents, there are particular people you might need to notify. So that could be the individuals involved and the privacy commissioner. And then for other cyber incidents, you could need to notify an insurer if you've got a relevant insurance policy. You might need to notify suppliers or customers. You might need to notify the police or the computer emergency response team, CERT. There's a bunch of organisations that you might need to tell to help either put an end to this or recover something later. And then the final step is prevent. So that is reviewing your policies and plans to say, well, did they stand up well, or do we need to enhance them? And then after you've done that emergency patching and other fixes, are there other security weaknesses that you've got? They may not have been the security weaknesses that caused this problem, but they could be outstanding security weaknesses that could be improved. And as Ray mentioned before, often the human factor is really relevant. If it's been caused by a particular employee, clicking a phishing link or being fooled in some way, then making sure that your training is up to date and that people are aware of those particular risks. That's, the usual things you do on that, that worst day. And when we say the worst day, in reality, this is actually the worst day, and it often goes on for another week or another month. There's a really long tail, for when you suffer a cyber attack. It can take a wee while to get fully up and running again.
Yeah, and particularly if you're caught up in claims against you as well, which is another area in terms of claims from damage resulting from your cyber attack. So again, highlights the need to get your incident response plan formalised. Okay, so contain, assess, notify, prevent. Those are the 4 steps that I've got. Now, Ray, you talked about employees and your people being the first line of defence, and they can also be the first chain of weakness as well. So what are your tips for raising awareness and training employees on cyber awareness?
Okay. I would see cyber security awareness is equivalent to your investment to your IT systems. As you enhance your security, it's crucial to protect your business and organization from cyber threats. And the key the key tips, it's getting your leadership involved. Because by getting your leadership involved to promote awareness, and when the leaders prioritize security, it sets a positive example for the rest of the organizations. Means that, hey, so it's not only the organizational priorities, but keeping the organization safe and secure are also part of everyday business now. So that will help to set the tone across and role modeled across organizations. The other one is housekeeping. Do you have clear policies and processes to essentially say clear what to do and what not to do for your employees, and including some of the key practices around, hey, when you are sharing information, what do you do? When you are when you're working setting up password, for example, is how do you manage them? So where do you store them? How long do you need to keep them? Around data handling, so do you have the right level of sensitivity identified to help your people to determine how sensitive they are, and also do you have clear processes and procedures to help them to understand, hey, if I detect something anomalies or something suspicious, who do I talk to? Another tip will be training sessions, just like an athlete. So cybersecurity require regular training. Conduct regular training with your people to understand what is the latest threats. So, for example, with the arrival of AI, what does it mean for your people when they use AI? What do they need to know? How exposed do they have, or new technology do they have around the phishing, ransomware, business email compromise that we talked about before? make those interactive. There's a lot of material out there. So I'll share the link afterwards. And the Cert NZ provide a good source of information and also work for your partners. So if you do have a IT or security partners, bring them in, ask them to talk to your people, ask them what do they see, what do their other customers are seeing or experiencing, so you feel that you're not alone, and ask them what tips that will be right for your business. Right sizing the tips are going to be important, right sizing the training are going to be important. Another tip would be simulate the attack. So coming back to the incident response plan, yes, you have a plan, you identify the events, but do you run simulations? So do you run simulations so that you know what to do? Just like fire drill, equivalent to fire drill for cyber, so for cyber events. So do those on a regular basis so you can learn from it. So there's always going to be improvement. The key is to do it on a regular intervals, and also not just that, but when your organization go through significant investment on technologies, changing in technologies, or even significant business process change, understand how they impact your incident response plan, run those simulation attacks as well. So run those simulations to see whether there are any gaps in your processes. Encourage reporting that I said before. It's a security or risk is everybody's business. Do you have the right culture? Have you built the right culture or culture to encourage people to report that? And where do you report them? And then another one will be around regular updates and reminder. So just because that it happens, cybersecurity happens around us, when we're busy, we tend to be forgotten around those important things. Just becoming top of mind. Send out newsletters, emailed, communication, just become top of mind. And last but not least, make it fun. So just because cybersecurity is a serious business, make it fun. Come up with quizzes, challenges, competitions, get your people involved on what do they like to see, how do they see that will make it better, so that they're becoming more involved. When they're involved, then it's easy for them, for that culture and behavior to stick. And some of these tips, I hope that it's going to be useful to our audience today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ray. I'm just doing a quick time check. We at 10:43, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, will run until 11 a.m. I have one more question for Peter, and then we'll answer some Q&A questions. I've already got some here on my list. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer them. So Peter, let's talk about contracting, favourite topic. Contracting with third-party vendors. Ray mentioned that they can be a really helpful resource to draw on in your cyber preparedness. So can you talk about what SMEs should look for in their contracts with third-party vendors to ensure robust confidentiality and data protection?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you're buying, any service or system from a third party, there'll always be a discussion around, well, what is the contract? And I think often as SMEs, we look at that contract and say, well, that's just the standard terms. Everyone has to sign up to that, and there's no chance to ask questions or no chance to negotiate. Even if there's no chance to negotiate, it still helps to understand what's in the contract and actually what are they promising or not promising. So whenever we think about data protection or confidentiality, ideally we want them to make some positive statements around, well, what are they going to do with the data we give to them? Are they going to take reasonable steps? Are they going to follow any particular security processes or protocols? What are the promises they're making to you? And even if their contract doesn't say something, what do their people say about their processes and confidentiality and data protection? If you ask those questions and they can't give you a good answer, I would say that would be a reason to pause and say, well, do we really want to purchase this product or service from this particular vendor? Or is there a different vendor offering a similar service who's actually going to promise us something in terms of, we will protect the data. Here's where we're going to keep it. We're going to store it in New Zealand. We're going to store it in Australia. We're going to ship it all around the world, or we're going to lock it down, give you your own access, and actually regularly check that things are being kept up to date. So what we generally look for is just any sort of commitment whatsoever, and then understanding, based on that triaging we talked about earlier, if what you're giving to them is run-of-the-mill, very basic information, then you can say, well, we don't really care as much what your privacy and confidentiality provisions are. If you're trusting them with your most sensitive information about your employees or about your customers, then it's really important, both just from your own business perspective, but also from the Privacy Act, to say, well, what are they promising? Are they actually committing to protect this? Are they following a privacy policy? Are they following any security protocols? And also, well, I have a motto, which is trust but verify. So just because they say they're doing it, is there any proof? Have they done a recent penetration test of their business? Have they been certified by someone else to say they're actually following what they do? Or are they just telling you what you want to hear? So trust but verify.
Thanks, Peter. We've got a question here from Dave. Which cybersecurity framework do you recommend New Zealand SMEs adhere to? And either you, Peter or Ray, can answer that.
Duncan. So it's the famous response is it depends. So, and I'll cover why it depends. If your business have contractual requirement to demonstrate to your customers that you are compliant to security, so you will look to certifiable model such as ISO 27001. Then you can go through the assessment process that you can demonstrate to your customer. Hey, here we go. So this is how we've gone through a process to ensure that we have our security practices in place. But if you don't have that requirement, then using the needs-based, the cybersecurity framework, and what that also means, the national cybersecurity centers, that they have localized versions for New Zealand businesses, where I will share the link in your response, in your questions, and that will help for New Zealand businesses or SME to adhere to, because they have actionable steps that are easier than ISO.
Thanks very much, Ray. Now, another one here is, and probably also for you, Ray, relatively specific about staff data, driver's license details, so sensitive information, held in a SharePoint drive with limited staff having access. Is this a safe place to store this information, or is there a better option?
There are better options, and because first and foremost, it's how long do you need to keep the driver license for? So is it a business requirement for you to keep that forever because of your business requirement, or do you use that as part of your employment process to validate the staff member? So if it's going to be the first one, then what you want to, if you need to keep it forever, what you want to do is, what are the additional measures that you can put in place to secure that information? So from you can encrypt the information before you store on SharePoint Drive. And then another one is, do you have access restrictions to people who can access it? And do you review the access regularly to make sure that those other people who can access, who are allowed to access, only have access to the data? If it's going to be the later options that you only need that for verified, for particular business processes, the best way is to not to keep them, because then if you don't have them, you don't have the exposure, or you minimize the exposure.
Very much, Ray. One question we had earlier from someone who submitted before the webinar is about insurance, specifically cyber insurance. So what types of cyber insurance are available, and is this a fail-safe option, Peter?
Yeah, so I think with any insurance, it can be part of your overall plan, but it's never the silver bullet to solve all the problems. So I do see cyber insurance as being an incredibly valuable part of your defence strategy here. One of the main things that cyber insurance does that's different than lots of other insurance, you suffer the event, the fire, the damage, the claim, and then you have a discussion with the insurers, and ultimately you get some sort of outcome, usually money. But that's a after the fact situation. The thing with cyber insurance, it's about the live response. There is an after the fact monetary element, but one of the key things that cyber insurance policies have is that immediate kind of breach response, that immediate grouping together of experts who are actually deployed to help you as a business recover from and investigate what's gone on. And so that's probably the most valuable part of it, is the fact that at a time with lots of stress, a lot of drama, there is a team of people who do this day in, day out, who become available as part of the policy, and then they turn up, and you don't have to worry about, well, who's covering the costs. If it's covered by the policy, these people are being paid to do this job. So I see that as being really valuable. And we, of course, advise clients when they don't have cyber insurance, and we advise clients when they do have cyber insurance. It's stressful for all of them, but I have to say it's less stressful for those who have the insurance in place. One of the other things with cyber insurance is that I guess the threshold to be able to get a policy is probably being raised, and that is by the questions you have to answer as part of taking up the policy. So when they do their risk assessment and underwriting, they ask you questions about, well, what backups do you have? Do you use MFA on all systems? What are the financial levels? What are the limits? Those questions, of course, help them manage their risk as an insurance company. They also help you manage your business in terms of putting in place those protections so that in the event that an event happens, you've got cover, or you've actually put further and further barriers, as Ray was saying, to make yourself less of a target because you've actually enabled those protections. So it can be useful both from a front end perspective and also at a back end.
Thanks, Peter. This question is probably for you, Ray. Do you know if there's a cut-off point before the bank can successfully recover funds transferred overseas?
Each scenario is different. So my response to this question, and I'll recommend you to talk to your bank, because each businesses will operate at a different financial levels. And so there's never a one size fits all. But what that means though, because most organizations didn't realize that you can speak to your bank and work through those scenarios. So if you have relationship managers, if you have bankers that you often deal with, talk to them. So run through those scenarios, fit those into your incident response plan or any business processes that, hey, so what can your bank support you in those scenarios around understanding that whatever, so the amount of, in certain situations, around the fund recovery. So if you're being provided a limit, then what you want to do is look at your business processes. Do you break them up so you can actually have chances that, so minimize your single exposure. So you stage them out, you spread them out, and also just understanding from a transfer overseas, what measures are available from your bank available to you to protect your organizations. So again, I recommend that you speak to your relationship managers or your bankers or your bank, so they can tailor something specific for your organizations.
Thanks, Ray. One question we had again before the webinar was about responding to a cyber breach or data breach, and what the most common mistakes are when trying to comply with privacy or breach notification requirements under the Privacy Act. Can you talk to that, Peter?
Yes, I can. So I guess one of the most common mistakes I see is people thinking that they're going to have all the answers before giving a notification. So in the reality of this is these incidents move quickly, but it will usually take some time to figure out, well, exactly what's gone wrong from a privacy perspective. And the Privacy Commissioner has said they expect to be notified as soon as possible and ideally within 72 hours. So what that means, and this is where we get involved really early on, is to say we should probably notify now if we think there's going to be an issue. We haven't got all the facts yet. We're still getting the facts, but let's tell the Commissioner now so that we cannot be blamed later on for not telling them, and then give them updates as we learn more. And that's a really common practice. And certainly there's a hesitance that some people have of saying, well, I don't want to tell anyone about it because it might not be as bad as I think, and we don't want to scare people, and we don't want to put people off. I would say in 2% of the cases it'll be better than you think, but in most cases it'll be just as bad as you think or worse. So you're not really saving anyone's blushes by holding back that notification. I guess the other mistake I see is people trying to tell too much of a rose-tinted story of going, well, don't worry, we've solved the problem now. There is no harm. That's really reassuring for a customer to hear, but it might not be true. So, stick to the facts of what you know, and don't over disclose. Work with your advisors, your lawyers, and anyone to tailor the messaging appropriately, but certainly don't overpromise and underdeliver when you're coming to notification time.
Points. Thanks, Peter. And just from a litigation perspective, this is something I used to deal with in a former life as a litigator, but be very careful about what you're putting down in writing in your business. I think there can be a tendency to panic and start maybe blaming or saying, well, this is what I think happened. As soon as you put something in writing, that becomes potentially discoverable, unless, of course, it's privileged. And so always speak to a legal advisor about that, and take steps to just make sure you have the right framing in mind. Okay, so I probably have time for one more question, and this is to you, Ray. Microsoft will stop supporting Windows 10 from October 2025. Will it make any devices with Windows 10 vulnerable to a cyber attack?
Depending whether that Microsoft will continue to provide all the patches and updates to keep Windows 10 secure. If they don't, then as any vulnerabilities and weakness being discovered in unsupported operating systems, and that's where your exposure increases, and that's where you're more vulnerable to cyber attack, because then your device, or the Windows 10 device, or unsupported device in general, that become a pivoting point for cyber criminal to commit their activities. So yes, if Microsoft will not provide any more patches or updates afterwards.
Right. Thanks so much, Ray. I think that's all we have time for today. We've covered a lot of ground. Thank you both so much for all the useful insights and learning. I've certainly learnt a lot myself. What we'll do after this session is we'll circulate a follow-up email for you to provide your feedback. We'll also have our contact details, so feel free to get in touch with us if you have any questions, if you want to continue the discussion. We're always really happy to chat. And again, thanks to you, thanks Peter, thanks Ray, thank you to the audience, and appreciate you all tuning in.
Thank you all.
Kia ora, thank you.